They bet him 50 silver coins he wouldn't last 5 minutes beside the cursed Omega. Kenneth Blackthorne, firstborn son of the Lycan king, heir to Thorn Vale, prince of a bloodline feared across 6 noble packs, took the seat beside Brenda Ashford with the lazy arrogance of someone accepting a joke at another person's expense. The hall roared, goblets lifted, laughter cracked through the air like bones under a boot. Brenda didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on her plate, like she'd learned long ago that survival meant making yourself smaller than the cruelty aimed at you. Then Kenneth's shoulder brushed hers. Something ripped open inside him. Not pain, not fear. Something older, meaner. A savage thing buried in the dark marrow of his soul, clawing free after 19 years of silence. It hit him so hard his lungs forgot how to work. Mine. The word didn't sound in his ears. It tore through his skull. Ancient. Feral. Starving. Kenneth's hand came down on the edge of the table hard enough to split the wood. The crack shot through the great hall like a whip. Laughter died mid-breath. Wine stilled in raised cups. Every head turned. And the girl they called Wolfless didn't even flinch. The great hall of Thornvale Keep smelled of roasted venison, cedar smoke, spilled wine, and cruelty polished into tradition. Around Kenneth, the heirs of the 6 noble packs lounged in velvet and silver, their wolves gleaming behind their eyes. Gold, amber, moon-pale grey, all the easy confidence of predators born knowing exactly what they were. Kenneth sat among them with a prince's posture and a dead thing's emptiness in his chest, because Kenneth Blackthorne had no wolf, and somehow, impossibly, the cursed Omega had just awakened something that wanted to tear the world apart to keep her. He'd been born silent, 19 years old, and the space inside his chest where his wolf should have lived was a hollow room with no door. His father, Alaric Blackthorne, the Lycan king, alpha of alphas, had spent a decade and a fortune trying to fix him. Healers from every territory, blood rituals under eclipses, a shaman who'd pressed burning sage into Kenneth's palms until the skin blistered, chanting, "Wake, wake, wake." Nothing woke, so Alaric had done what all proud men eventually do with the thing they cannot control. He hid it. He gave Kenneth the finest tutors, the sharpest swords, the cruelest trainers. Made him fast, lethal, brilliant. Made him everything a wolf would be, without the wolf. And he made Kenneth swear on his mother's grave never to reveal his deficiency. To the world, Kenneth Blackthorne was simply reserved, controlled, a prince who chose not to shift. But wolves could smell a lie, and the noble pack heirs smelled his. "Blackthorne," drawled Dorian Voss, heir of the Silver Fang pack, his canines already descended in a permanent smirk. "You look bored. Want some entertainment?" Kenneth lifted his goblet. His fingers were steady. They were always steady. "I'm entertained enough watching you chew with your mouth open, Dorian." Laughter, sharp, hierarchical. They laughed because Kenneth was the king's son, not because he was funny. He knew the difference. He'd memorized every shade of false laughter, the way a blind man memorizes the number of steps to his door. Dorian leaned forward, eyes glinting. "See that girl? 3rd row, the one sitting alone." Kenneth didn't need to look. He already knew who sat in the 3rd row's corner, the same seat, every meal, every day. A small figure in a threadbare grey dress, shoulders curved inward as if she were trying to fold herself into something that took up less space in the world. Brenda Ashford, Omega ranked, orphaned. and, according to every healer who'd examined her since childhood, wolfless. The only other wolfless wolf in Thornvale. 50 silver coins, Dorian said, sliding the pouch across the table, if you sit next to her for the entire meal. The Hollow Prince and the Ghost Girl. He grinned. It's poetic. The table erupted. The joke was vicious because it was layered. Sit next to the lowest creature in the keep, the one even the kitchen staff wouldn't touch, and in doing so, confirm the rumor everyone already whispered, that Kenneth was just like her. Empty, broken. A wolf-shaped shell with nothing inside. Kenneth looked at the silver pouch, then at Brenda Ashford's bowed head, then at the 50 pairs of eyes watching him, waiting for him to refuse, waiting for the crack in the armor that would finally confirm what they suspected. He picked up the pouch. He stood. Keep your coins. And he walked toward the third row. The hall rustled, whispers, gasps, the scraping of chairs as people turned to watch. Kenneth didn't hear any of it. There was a roaring in his ears that he couldn't explain, a heat building in his chest that felt like the onset of a fever. He pulled out the chair beside Brenda Ashford and sat down. She didn't look up. Her hands were wrapped around a wooden bowl of thin broth, the Omega ration, barely enough to sustain a child, and her knuckles were white. This close, he could see things he'd never noticed from the head table. A scar along her jaw, faded to pearl. The way her dark hair was braided so tightly it must have ached. And around her neck, on a frayed leather cord, a single object. A small, carved wooden wolf. No bigger than a thumbnail. The wood was worn smooth from years of touching. I'm not here because of a bet, Kenneth said quietly. She still didn't look up. Yes, you are. Her voice was soft. Not weak. Soft the way deep water is soft, hiding the current beneath. It caught him off guard. He opened his mouth to respond, and then his entire body seized. It started in his spine. A vibration, deep and seismic, like a tuning fork struck against bone. It raced upward through his ribs, into his throat, behind his eyes. The room tilted. Colors sharpened. The cedar smoke became a symphony of individual notes, resin, bark, the memory of rain, and beneath it all, he caught a scent that obliterated everything else. Lavender, rain-soaked earth, and something ancient, something that smelled like home. It was coming from her, and then, from the black, silent void where his wolf had never lived, a voice erupted. Not a thought, a voice, deep as a canyon, raw as an open wound, thrumming with 19 years of caged fury. Mine! Kenneth's hand shot to the table's edge. The wood cracked under his grip. His vision went white at the borders, then gold, actual gold, like looking through fire. He couldn't breathe. His heart was a war drum. Every hair on his body stood on end, and his canines, which had never once descended, punched through his gums with a pain so sharp he tasted copper. The hall went dead silent. Brenda Ashford finally looked up. Her eyes were the color of rain, grey, luminous, impossibly deep. And they were wide with something Kenneth recognized immediately because he'd worn it every day of his life. Fear. Your eyes, she whispered. They're gold. Brenda Ashford had learned 3 rules by the time she was 6 years old. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't take more food than what's given. And never ever let them see you cry. She'd arrived at Thornvale Keep as an infant, wrapped in a smoke-stained blanket, deposited on the steps of the servants' wing during a border raid that killed her parents. No pack claimed her. No family came forward. The keep took her, in the way an institution takes in anything unwanted, with paperwork, a cot in the Omega quarters, and a number stitched into her clothing where a name should be. Omega 7. It wasn't until she was 4 that the healers discovered she was wolfless. The diagnosis came during the annual awakening ceremony, when pups were supposed to feel their wolves for the first time. A warmth in the chest, a second heartbeat, a presence that would grow alongside them like a shadow. The healers had placed their hands on Brenda's small rib cage and felt nothing. Tested her blood. Nothing. Tried a forced communion with a moon-blessed crystal, and the crystal went dark in her palm. Empty, the head healer had reported to the council. No wolf signature at all. She's an anomaly. Anomaly. The word followed her like a second shadow. In a society where your wolf defined your rank, your worth, your right to exist, wolflessness wasn't a disability, it was a verdict. The kitchen wolves wouldn't let her near the food until they'd eaten. The other Omegas moved their cots away from hers. The warrior pups threw stones when the trainers weren't watching, and sometimes when they were. Brenda learned to be invisible. She learned to walk without sound, to eat without chewing, to exist in the narrow spaces between attention. She found a corner seat in the great hall, where the torchlight didn't quite reach, and she sat there 3 times a day, every day, for 15 years. She braided her hair tight because loose hair caught hands. She kept her eyes down because eye contact was a challenge, and challenges from a wolfless Omega were punished. The only thing she kept, the only thing she'd arrived with, besides the blanket, was the carved wooden wolf on the leather cord around her neck. It was crude, whittled by an amateur hand, but the shape was unmistakable. A wolf mid-howl, head thrown back, calling to something it couldn't see. She didn't know who'd made it. Her father, maybe. Her mother. Someone who'd wanted her to carry a wolf with her, even if she'd never carry one inside her. She touched it when the nights were worst, when the Omega quarters were cold and the other wolves' dreams leaked into the air as low, unconscious growls that reminded her she was the only silent thing in a world built on sound. And then the prince sat down beside her. Brenda had watched Kenneth Blackthorne from her corner for years the way a mouse watches a hawk, with the respectful attention of prey. He was beautiful in the way all dangerous things were beautiful, sharp-jawed, dark-haired, moving with the coiled grace of something that could strike at any moment. But there was something else about him, something the other wolves didn't seem to notice, because they were too busy fearing his surname. A stillness, not the stillness of control, but the stillness of absence. Like a room that should have music but didn't. She'd wondered sometimes if he was like her. She'd never dared ask. And now he was sitting beside her, his shoulder inches from hers, and the entire hall was staring, and she could feel every one of those stares like individual needles pressing into her skin. She knew what this was. She'd been the subject of bets before. Dared interactions, pity gestures, cruelties disguised as charity. She'd learned to endure them the way she endured everything, by becoming smaller. "I'm not here because of a bet," he said. "Yes, you are," she answered, because lying to herself had never been a luxury she could afford. And then something happened that she couldn't explain. The prince's body went rigid. His hand cracked the table. Actually cracked it, the wood splitting along the grain with a sound like a bone breaking. The air around him changed. It went from the cool, scentless nothing she was used to near him to something thick and electric, charged with ozone and pine, and something deeper, something that made her stomach flip and her pulse hammer. She looked up. His eyes were gold. Not amber, Not hazel, gold. The pure, molten gold of a wolf's first awakening, so bright they seemed to cast their own light. His canines had descended, visible between his parted lips, and his hands were shaking. No, vibrating, with a fine, violent tremor that had nothing to do with cold. Around them, the hall erupted. She heard chairs falling, voices shouting, Dorian Voss's incredulous bark of "What the?" But it was all distant, muffled, as if she and Kenneth existed inside a bubble where only 2 heartbeats mattered. "Your eyes," she whispered. "They're gold." He stared at her, through her, into her, and what she saw in those gold eyes terrified her more than any cruelty she'd ever endured, because it wasn't rage or dominance or contempt. It was recognition. "It's you," he breathed, his voice cracked on the words. "Goddess above, it's you. My wolf. I can hear him. I can finally hear him." He reached for her hand. His fingers closed around her wrist, and the warmth that flooded through the contact was so intense, so impossibly real, that Brenda gasped. It felt like sunlight after years underground, like a door opening in a room she'd thought had no walls. The carved wolf at her throat began to vibrate, and deep inside Brenda Ashford, in the hollow, silent place where the healers had found nothing, something stirred. The news reached Alaric Blackthorne before dessert was served. The Lycan king was in his war chamber, reviewing border treaties with the Eastern Pax, when his beta, a scarred, granite-faced wolf named Ronan, burst through the oak doors without knocking. That alone told Alaric the severity. Ronan hadn't breached protocol in 30 years. "Your son," Ronan said. "His wolf has awakened." Alaric's pen stopped mid-signature. His wolf, a massive, iron-grey beast named Fenris, who'd torn out the throats of 3 rival alphas to claim the throne, surged forward with a roar of triumph that shook his bones. A son's first awakening was the greatest moment in a father's life. It meant the bloodline held. The dynasty continued. The throne was secure. Who was the catalyst? Alaric asked. Because wolves didn't just awaken. They awakened in response to something. A threat, a bond, a mate. Ronan's expression shifted. It was subtle, a tightening around the eyes, a fractional drop of the jaw. But Alaric had been reading wolves for 40 years. "The Omega girl," Ronan said. "Brenda Ashford, the wolfless one." The war chamber went cold. Alaric set down his pen with the deliberate care of a man controlling an explosion. His wolf, Fenris, recoiled, not from the name but from the implications, a mate bond, between the Crown Prince and a wolfless Omega, an orphan, a nobody. The lowest creature in the keep's hierarchy bonded to the highest. It was more than a scandal. It was an extinction event for everything Alaric had built. "Clear the hall," Alaric commanded. "Bring my son to me. Alone." The walk to the war chamber took 7 minutes. Kenneth arrived with gold still flickering in his eyes, and his wolf howling inside him. A sound so loud, so joyously violent, that it felt like being reborn and torn apart simultaneously. His wolf had a name. He'd whispered it the moment he awakened. Theron. And Theron was magnificent, a beast of black fire and silver edges, pressing against the walls of Kenneth's mind with the desperate urgency of something that had been caged too long. "Father," Alaric stood behind his desk, backlit by the war chamber's great fireplace. The flames threw his shadow across the stone floor like a stain. He was still handsome in the way that power preserves men. Silver-streaked hair, jaw like an anvil, eyes the color of winter steel. but there was nothing warm in those eyes. There never had been. "Tell me what happened," Kenneth told him. Every detail. The seat, the scent, the crack of the table, the golden flood behind his eyes, the voice, Theron's voice, screaming one word with the certainty of scripture. "Mine." He told his father about Brenda's rain-grey eyes and the way his entire body had recalibrated around her presence, every sense suddenly sharper, every breath suddenly purposeful. He was shaking as he spoke, not with fear, with wonder. Alaric listened to all of it with the expression of a surgeon examining a tumor. "You felt a connection," Alaric said when Kenneth finished. "That's hormonal, adolescent. The proximity to another wolfless individual triggered a sympathetic response, not a mate bond." "My wolf spoke her name, Father, before I even knew it." "You don't have a wolf." The words landed like a slap. Kenneth staggered. Inside him, Theron snarled, a sound so ferocious that Kenneth's vision flickered gold again. "I do now," Kenneth said quietly. Alaric came around the desk. He moved the way he always moved, like a landslide, slow and inevitable. He stopped inches from his son and locked eyes with him. When a Lycan king makes eye contact, it isn't a conversation. It's a command. The alpha dominance rolled off Alaric in waves so heavy that the candles in the room guttered and the stone beneath Kenneth's boots seemed to tremble. "Listen to me carefully," Alaric said. "You are the heir to the Lycan throne. Your mate will be selected from the noble pack bloodlines, someone with power, pedigree, political value. Not an Omega, not an orphan, and certainly not a wolfless girl whose only contribution to this dynasty would be to confirm every rumor about our bloodline's weakness. She's my mate. She is nobody, and you will never speak to her again." The command hit Kenneth like a physical force, an alpha's direct order, from father to son, from king to subject. It bypassed reason and went straight to the spine. His knees buckled. Theron howled, a sound of anguish so raw that Kenneth's nose began to bleed. "Furthermore," Alaric continued, his voice the cold mechanism of a king who had chosen dynasty over everything else, "the girl will be relocated. The Omega quarters are beneath her station, as is the keep itself. I'm sending her to the border outpost at Grey Hollow. She'll serve the garrison there. Grey Hollow is a death post. The Eastern rogues raid it every month. Then she'll learn to be useful." Kenneth stared at his father. The blood from his nose dripped onto his shirt, dark spots spreading across the white linen like accusations. In his chest, Theron was throwing himself against the walls of Kenneth's mind, cracking them, clawing at the cage that Alaric's command had built. "I won't let you do this," Kenneth whispered. Alaric's eyes flashed, not gold, but the iron grey of Fenris, cold and absolute. "You don't let me do anything, boy. I am your king. You are my heir. And this conversation is over." He turned back to his desk. She leaves at dawn. They came for Brenda at midnight, not at dawn. Alaric had moved the timeline because he was a man who understood that hope was a weapon, and the surest way to disarm it was to strike before it could be wielded. 2 royal guards appeared at the Omega quarters, their wolves visible behind their eyes, massive presences that made the air taste like ozone, and pulled Brenda from her cot without explanation. She'd been sleeping with her hand curled around the wooden wolf, the way she always slept, and when the guards yanked her upright, the leather cord snapped. The carving fell to the floor. "Wait," she said, reaching for it. A boot came down on her hand, not hard enough to break bones, but hard enough to make the point. She pulled her hand back, cradling it against her chest, and watched as a guard kicked the tiny wolf under the cots. "Move!" They took her through the keep's back corridors, the servant passages that smelled of lye and old stone, and loaded her into a covered wagon. No explanation. No farewell. Just the clang of iron bolts and the lurch of wheels on cobblestone. Brenda sat in the wagon's dark belly and pressed her palm against her sternum, where the wooden wolf had rested for 20 years. The skin there still felt warm, and beneath it, the stirring, that impossible flicker she'd felt when Kenneth touched her wrist, was still there, faint and fragile, like a candle in a hurricane. She didn't cry. She'd used up her tears years ago. Instead, she closed her eyes and replayed the only moment of her life that had ever made sense. Gold eyes looking at her like she was the answer to a prayer. In the war chamber, Kenneth was breaking things. He'd overturned his father's desk, shattered the window with a chair, put his fist through the portrait of his grandfather that hung above the fireplace. Theron was raging, not just in his mind, but in his body, trying to force the shift that Kenneth's muscles didn't yet know how to perform. His bones ached, his skin rippled, his vision strobed between human sight and wolf sight, the world alternating between dim and blazing. "She's gone," he snarled at Ronan, who stood in the doorway with the careful neutrality of a man who'd survived 3 kings. "Where did they take her?" Grey Hollow. "That's a 3-day ride. In this weather, through rogue territory. The king's orders, my prince." Kenneth stopped. Glass crunched under his boots. Blood dripped from his knuckles where the portrait's frame had bitten into his skin. He looked at Ronan, really looked at him, and saw something he hadn't expected. Beneath the granite facade, behind those duty-bound eyes, there was sorrow. "You knew her mother," Kenneth said. It wasn't a question. Something Theron had whispered to him. A fragment of scent memory, pulled from the ether. Ronan's jaw tightened. Brenda Ashford. She was a healer, a good one. She and your mother were close. My mother. Before the Queen died, she made me promise something. Ronan paused. The silence stretched. She made me promise that if the Ashford girl was ever in danger, I would help her. Your mother knew, Kenneth. She knew what Brenda was. What do you mean? Ronan reached into his coat and withdrew something small, wrapped in cloth. He held it out. Kenneth took it and unwrapped it with shaking hands. It was a wooden wolf, identical to the one Brenda wore. Same size, same crude carving, same howling posture. But this one was different. Where Brenda's was worn smooth, this one still had sharp edges, and on the underside, carved in letters so small they were almost invisible, was an inscription. "For the one who will wake the king's wolf." Kenneth stared at it. The wood pulsed in his palm with a warmth that had no physical source. "Your mother carved 2, Ronan said. "One for you, which she gave to Brenda Ashford for safekeeping before she died, and one she kept for when the time came. My mother knew I'd be wolfless. She knew your wolf was waiting, for the right person, for the one whose soul matched yours." Ronan's voice was thick. She didn't know it would be Brenda, but she knew it would be someone the king would try to destroy. Kenneth closed his fist around the wolf. The wood bit into his already bleeding palm, and the blood seeped into the carving's grooves, filling the inscription with red. Theron surged forward, not in rage this time, but with purpose. Crystalline, absolute purpose. "You're going after her," Ronan said. "Not a question. I'm going after her. Your father will see it as treason. My father sent my mate to die in a rogue-infested outpost because her existence embarrasses him. Kenneth looked at Ronan with eyes that were no longer flickering. They were solid, burning, unwavering gold. That's not kingship, that's cowardice. He took his mother's wolf carving and threaded it onto a new leather cord. He hung it around his neck, where it settled against his sternum, the mirror image of where Brenda had worn hers. "Tell me the fastest route to Grey Hollow," he said, and then forget I asked. Grey Hollow was a wound in the earth. The outpost squatted at the edge of the Thornvale territory like a rotting tooth. Timber walls stained black with decades of smoke and blood, a watchtower missing half its roof, and a garrison of 30 wolves who had either been sent here as punishment or had nowhere else left to go. The surrounding forest was old-growth pine, so dense that sunlight reached the ground only in thin, reluctant threads. The air smelled of damp earth, wolf musk, and the metallic tang that always lingered where blood had been spilled too many times. Brenda arrived on the 3rd day, half frozen and starving. The guards who'd transported her handed a sealed letter to the garrison commander. A grizzled alpha named Harlan, who read it, looked at Brenda and spat. "Omega labor," he said. "Kitchen, laundry, wound care. You eat after everyone else. You sleep in the supply shed." "Yes, sir." "And Omega?" He leaned close enough that his wolf's presence pressed against her like a wall of heat. "We get raided out here. When the rogues come, you're not worth protecting. Understood?" "Understood." The supply shed had no cot, no blanket, and a gap in the wall wide enough to admit wind and rain. Brenda dragged a pile of grain sacks into a corner and curled up on them, her hand going automatically to her throat, and finding nothing. The wooden wolf was gone. The one thing she'd carried through every year of loneliness, every stone thrown, every night spent invisible. Gone. She pressed her face into the grain sacks and allowed herself exactly 3 breaths of grief. Then she sat up, dried her eyes with her sleeve, and got to work. The stirring inside her hadn't stopped. If anything, it had grown. Every night, lying on the grain sacks, she felt it, a warmth behind her ribs, rhythmic and patient, like a second heartbeat learning to synchronize with her first. She didn't understand it. She didn't dare name it. But she talked to it, sometimes, in the deepest part of the night when the garrison wolves were asleep and the forest was a cathedral of silence. "Are you real?" she'd whisper. "Or am I finally going mad?" The warmth would pulse in response. And once, just once, she thought she heard something. Not a word. A sound. Low, feminine, impossibly gentle. A wolf's murmur. On the 12th night, the rogues came. They struck at the witching hour, 30 wolves, maybe more, pouring from the tree line like a dark tide. They were eastern rogues, packless and savage, wolves who had broken so many bonds that their human sides had eroded, leaving only the beast. They hit the garrison's north wall with such force that the timber cracked, and 3 defenders went down in the first 10 seconds. Brenda was in the kitchen when the attack alarm sounded, a horn blast that shook the walls and turned the air to adrenaline. She'd been cleaning wounds all week, learning the garrison's medical supplies, and her hands moved before her brain caught up. She grabbed bandages, suturing thread, the precious bottle of wolfsbane antiseptic, and ran toward the sound of combat. The courtyard was chaos, blood on the snow, wolves in half-shift, snouts elongated, claws extended, eyes blazing, clashing with rogue wolves who fought like rabid animals. Harlan was down, a gash across his ribs that exposed white bone. 2 wolves were dragging him toward the barracks. Brenda dropped to her knees beside him and pressed bandages to the wound. Her hands should have been shaking. They weren't. "What are you doing?" Harlan coughed, blood on his teeth. "Get to the shed." "Shut up and breathe," Brenda said, with a calm authority that surprised them both. She worked through the battle. Wolf after wolf dragged to her, bleeding, broken, howling in pain. She sutured by torchlight. She set a dislocated shoulder. She held a young wolf's hand as he died, his wolf light fading from his eyes like an ember going dark, and she told him he was brave, and that the goddess was waiting, and that it was okay to let go. By dawn, the rogues had retreated. 12 garrison wolves were dead, 15 were wounded, and the wolfless Omega, who wasn't worth protecting, had saved 7 lives with borrowed thread and steady hands. Harlan found her sitting against the barracks wall, covered in other people's blood, staring at the sunrise with the blank, 1,000-yard gaze of someone who had seen too much. "How?" he asked. "You're wolfless. You should have been paralyzed with fear." Brenda looked at him. Her rain-grey eyes held something new. Not hardness, but clarity. "I've been afraid every day of my life, Commander. Fear isn't new to me. It's just furniture." She touched her chest where the wooden wolf used to hang, and inside her, the second heartbeat pulsed. Stronger now, louder, almost a voice. Almost. Kenneth felt her before he saw her. He'd been running for 3 days, on horseback at first, then on foot when the horse threw a shoe in the frozen Ashwood River and refused to cross. He ran through the night, through terrain that would have broken most humans, fueled by Theron's relentless, burning urgency. His wolf hadn't fully emerged yet. The shift was still a promise, not a reality, his body learning the shapes it would need to become. But Theron was there in every step, lending him speed and endurance that surpassed anything his training had given him. And then, cresting the ridge above Grey Hollow, he felt her. It was like a compass needle finding north, a click in his chest, a settling, a rightness so profound it was almost painful. Theron whimpered, not in distress, but in relief. The kind of sound a wolf makes when it finally hears its pack after being lost in the dark. What he found at Grey Hollow nearly broke him. The outpost was devastated. The north wall was rubble, bodies under canvas, blood freezing in the snow, and in the center of the courtyard, a small figure in a stained dress was tending a fire, heating water for the wounded, moving between patients with the quiet competence of someone who had found her purpose in the worst possible place. "Brenda," she turned. The firelight caught her face, thinner now, harder, but alive. So intensely alive. Her eyes found his, and the world contracted to a single point. "You came," she said, as if she'd known he would, as if the second heartbeat in her chest had told her, "I will always come." He crossed the courtyard in 5 strides and took her face in his hands. She was trembling, or maybe he was, and when his palms touched her skin, Theron howled with such joy that Kenneth's bones vibrated. The bond pulsed between them like a living wire, golden and warm and so real it was almost visible. "Your wolf," she whispered, her hands coming up to cover his. "I can feel him. He's been waiting for you, his whole life." Kenneth pressed his forehead to hers. "I've been waiting for you." The garrison wolves had gathered. They watched the Crown Prince, disheveled, blooded, wild-eyed, hold the wolfless Omega like she was the center of the universe. Harlan stood among them, his wound freshly bandaged by Brenda's hands, and his expression had shifted from suspicion to something cautious and wondering. "My prince," Harlan said carefully. "Does the king know you're here?" "He will." The answer came not from Kenneth, but from the forest. 20 Royal Guard wolves melted from the tree line in perfect formation. Silver armor, red cloaks, eyes glowing with the unified light of wolves operating under a direct alpha command. And behind them, on a horse the color of ash, rode Alaric Blackthorne. The Lycan king dismounted with the deliberate calm of a man who had won wars before breakfast. He surveyed the ruined outpost, the canvas-covered dead, the blood-stained snow, and his gaze settled on his son's hands, still cradling Brenda Ashford's face. "Step away from her," Alaric commanded. The alpha dominance hit like a tsunami. Every wolf in the courtyard dropped, some to their knees, some flat to the ground. Harlan's wolves pressed their faces into the snow. Even the wounded whimpered. Kenneth didn't move. His bones screamed, his muscles locked. Every instinct engineered by evolution told him to submit, to bare his throat, to obey the alpha of alphas. Theron strained against the command, howling in defiance. "No," Kenneth said. The word landed like a boulder in still water. Alaric's eyes widened. A fractional expansion, but from the Lycan king, it was the equivalent of a gasp. "You dare?" "I dare because you taught me to." Kenneth turned to face his father, keeping Brenda behind him. "You taught me that strength isn't about power. It's about what you protect. You just forgot to mention that it's only true when the thing you're protecting is politically convenient." Alaric's wolf surfaced. The air went thick with alpha presence so heavy that the snow at his feet began to melt. The garrison wolves pressed deeper into the ground. Brenda gripped the back of Kenneth's coat, not hiding, anchoring. "This girl is nothing," Alaric said. "No wolf, no bloodline, no power. She saved 7 lives 3 nights ago with no wolf, no weapon, and no one protecting her." Kenneth's voice was steady. Behind him, Brenda's grip tightened. "What did you do 3 nights ago, Father? Sign treaties? Drink wine? Send another embarrassment to die at the border?" The courtyard had gone so silent that Brenda could hear her own blood moving through her veins. Could hear the garrison wolves' suppressed breathing. Could hear, distantly, the creak of pine trees bowing under the weight of snow. And then, from the silent place inside her, the place where the healers had found nothing, the place that had pulsed and stirred and whispered for 12 days, something answered the silence. Not a whisper this time. A howl. It started in Brenda's chest, and it ended everywhere. The howl tore through her body with a force that should have broken her apart, but instead knit her together. Bone and blood and soul, woven tight by a voice she'd waited 20 years to hear. Her wolf, not dead, not absent, not empty, sleeping, buried so deep inside her that no healer's hand, no crystal, no ritual could reach her. Waiting, just as Theron had waited inside Kenneth, for the bond that would wake her. Brenda's eyes blazed white. Not gold, not amber. White. The color of moonlight on fresh snow, the color of stars before dawn. A light so pure it cast shadows in every direction. Her spine arched. Her hands left Kenneth's coat and flew outward, fingers spread, and the air around her ignited with visible energy. Silver threads spiraling outward from her body like a web, touching every wolf in the courtyard. The garrison wolves gasped. The ones who'd been wounded felt their pain recede. Harlan's hand went to his ribs, where his half-healed gash suddenly closed beneath the bandages, new skin knitting with an audible hiss. The young wolf with the broken leg felt the bone shift, realign, fuse. Throughout the courtyard, 15 wounded wolves felt their bodies mend in the space of a single breath. A lunar wolf. Not just any Luna, a white Luna, the rarest manifestation in shifter history. The legends spoke of them in whispers. Wolves born once in a millennium, their power not in fangs or dominance, but in healing, in binding, in holding a pack together at the cellular level. They were the opposite of alphas, not the fist of the pack, but the heart. And they were always mistaken for wolfless, because their wolves didn't register on the same frequency as others. They existed below the threshold of ordinary senses, dormant until awakened by their true mate. Brenda floated in the white light, and inside her, her wolf, a creature of pale silver and luminous eyes, unfurled like a flower that had been clenched against the frost for 20 years. She felt it like breathing after drowning, like warmth after hypothermia, like being seen after a lifetime of invisibility. "My name is Alara," the wolf whispered, and Brenda realized with a shock that pierced her heart that her wolf carried her mother's name. The silver threads reached Kenneth. They wound around his chest, his throat, his clenched hands, and Theron answered with a howl that shook the mountain. The bond between them crystallized, visible for an instant as a golden white cord connecting their hearts, pulsing with shared light. And then it reached Alaric. The Lycan king staggered. Not from force, from recognition. The silver threads touched Fenris, his iron wolf. And Fenris did something he had never done in 40 years of war and politics and ruthless dominance. He whimpered. Because Fenris recognized the energy. It was the same energy that had once flowed through another white-eyed woman, a healer with gentle hands and a carved wooden wolf, and a son she'd died protecting. "Sarah," Alaric breathed, his dead wife's name, his dead mate's energy, echoing through the girl he'd sent to die. The light faded slowly, like dawn arriving in reverse. Brenda sank to her knees in the snow, her eyes dimming from white to their normal rain-grey, her body shaking with the aftershock of transformation. Kenneth caught her before she fell. He wrapped his arms around her and held her against his chest, where two wooden wolves, his and hers reunited, pressed between their hearts. Because he'd found hers, in the Omega quarters, under the cots, before he'd left. He'd followed Theron's nose to the kicked-away carving, retrieved it, and carried it against his own heart for 3 days. Now he pulled it from inside his shirt and pressed it into her palm. Brenda looked at the wooden wolf, worn, beloved, recovered, and then at Kenneth. "You found it," she whispered. "I'll always find you." The courtyard was silent. 30 wolves, garrison, guard, commander, and king, stood in the presence of something that hadn't occurred in living memory. A white luna's awakening. A bond so powerful it had healed the wounded and shaken the hierarchy to its foundations. Alaric Blackthorne stood alone in the snow. His royal guard had unconsciously shifted away from him, drawn by the gravitational pull of the bond that now radiated from Kenneth and Brenda like heat from a forge. His wolf, Fenris, had gone quiet. Not the quiet of dominance, but the quiet of grief. "Father," Kenneth said, still holding Brenda, "I am your son, and she is my mate. And if you make me choose between your crown and her life, I will choose her. Every time." Alaric looked at his son, looked at the wolfless Omega who had become the rarest wolf alive, looked at the garrison wolves who were watching their king with something new in their eyes. Not fear, not duty, but judgment. The Lycan king closed his eyes. When he opened them, Fenris was gone from behind them, retreated into the deep interior where old wolves go when their pride can no longer sustain them. He said nothing. He mounted his horse, turned it toward the tree line, and rode into the forest alone. The royal guard did not follow. 6 months later, the keep had changed. The third-row corner seat in the great hall was empty now. Not because Brenda Ashford had disappeared, but because she sat at the head table, not in the king's chair, but in the Luna's seat, which had been vacant for 19 years. Flowers grew from the stone window-sills, encouraged by her presence. The kitchen wolves prepared equal rations for every rank, and the Omega quarters had been converted into a proper dormitory, with beds and blankets, and a healer who visited weekly. Kenneth had not taken the throne. Not yet. Alaric had retreated to the northern keep, a voluntary exile that the court called sabbatical, and the wolves called reckoning. He was not gone permanently. Some days Ronan received letters in his handwriting, asking about the garrison rebuilds, the eastern border treaties, the number of wounded who had recovered. He never asked about Brenda. But he asked about the pack's health, and Brenda was the pack's health now, so the answer was always the same. Better. Everything was getting better. Brenda's white wolf, Ilara, had changed her. Not just physically. Though she was stronger now, her senses sharper, her body humming with the quiet power of a Luna who was learning the breadth of her gifts. The change was deeper. She walked differently. Not with dominance, but with presence. She looked people in the eye, not as a challenge, but as an acknowledgement. I see you. You matter. You are not invisible. She healed the way she breathed, constantly, instinctively, without performance, a touch on a feverish forehead, a hand on a grieving widow's shoulder. The silver threads that had exploded during her awakening now flowed in subtle, steady currents, binding the pack not through fear, but through care. Wolves who had thrown stones at her as a child now came to her with their sick pups, their aching joints, their broken hearts, and she helped them all, not because they deserved it, but because healing wasn't about deserving. It was about need. Kenneth's wolf, Theron, had finally shifted. The first time had been messy, bones cracking in the wrong order, fur coming in patches, a shape that was more nightmare than wolf. But Brenda had been there, her hands on his fur, Ilara's silver light smoothing the transition. And by the third full moon, Theron emerged complete, a massive black wolf with silver-tipped fur and golden eyes that burned like twin furnaces. They ran together under every full moon. Theron and Ilara, black and silver, fire and moonlight, racing through the pine forests that surrounded Thorn Vale, with a joy so fierce it frightened the birds from the trees. Sometimes the garrison wolves joined them. Grey Hollow had been rebuilt, properly this time, and Harlan's wolves had become the fiercest advocates for the new Luna, telling anyone who would listen about the wolfless girl who had saved 7 lives with borrowed thread. "Tell me something," Brenda said one evening, sitting on the rampart wall above the great hall, her legs dangling over the edge. The sunset painted the world in copper and violet. Kenneth sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched, always touching now, as if the bond demanded constant confirmation of the other's presence. Anything. That first day, in the hall, when you sat down. She turned to look at him. Was any part of you sitting down because of the bet? Kenneth was quiet for a moment. Honest. Considering. I told myself it wasn't. But maybe there was a part of me that needed an excuse to do what I'd wanted to do for years. Which was? Sit next to the only person in that room who understood what it felt like to be hollow. Brenda reached beneath her collar and pulled out the wooden wolf. It hung beside its twin, Kenneth's mother's carving, which he now wore on the same cord. 2 wolves side by side, both mid-howl, both calling to something they couldn't see. She held them in her palm, and Kenneth covered her hand with his. "We're not hollow anymore," she said. No, below them, the keep was alive with sound. Laughter from the hall, the clang of training swords, the distant howl of a wolf greeting the rising moon. Thornvale was healing. Not perfectly, not completely. There were still wolves who whispered, still factions who questioned, still a king in the north who hadn't yet found the words for what he'd done. But the foundation had shifted. The crack that Kenneth's hand had put in the dining table had become a crack in the old order, and through it, something new was growing. Brenda leaned her head against Kenneth's shoulder. He pressed his lips to her hair. And from deep inside both of them, from Theron and Ilara, from black fire and silver light, a single, shared howl rose into the darkening sky. Not a howl of dominance, not a howl of pain, a howl of homecoming. It echoed off the mountains, rolled through the forests, reached the northern keep where an old king sat alone by a fire, listening. And though Alaric Blackthorne said nothing, his wolf, Fenris, stirred. Not with pride. Not yet. With something quieter. Something that, in time, might learn to become hope. Thank you for watching. If this story stirred something in your soul, if you felt the bond ignite, the howl rise, and the hollow places begin to fill, then you are exactly where you're meant to be. Hit that like button if Brenda's strength gave you chills. Subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story. Share this with someone who needs to hear that being wolfless doesn't mean being worthless. Drop a comment below. Which moment hit you hardest? Kenneth's wolf speaking for the first time, or Brenda's white wolf awakening? We read every single comment. New stories drop every week. Stay wild, stay loyal, and remember, the ones they call broken are usually the ones the goddess made strongest. The end.